Hi everyone, and welcome back to what I think is probably going to be the final video in my kind of magic series. What do you think, Maya? Do you think we can manage to fit in another video, or is that enough? I think she thinks that's enough. So I can't quite believe that we're at the end of the series already, but I do think that I've said everything that I really need to say and want to say on the topic of magic. And one of the things, of course, that I have I can hear Maya scratching at the door. One of the things that I have not done in this series deliberately, I decided not to do, was go into a great deal of detail about magical, specific magical practices and methods. I spoke generally about different magical methods. And the reason for that was simply because there's lots of information out there about the type of individual magical practices that you can take part in. And if you're interested in magic and you feel that it's got something that can offer you something, then by all means look into those. But what I really wanted to do was talk a bit more about the principles of magic and my perspective on magic, and work my way through a process of thinking about where I was going with my magical stream of thought. And this video is about where I've arrived, really. So I think probably the thing to do is just to move now into revisiting a model that I shared with you in a previous one of the videos, which I think was the one on magical methods, or magical models actually, I think it was. And that is my summary of different magical models that are out there. And we spoke about the different kinds of model that you can have: the energy-based model, the mental model, chaos magic model, theist model or spirit model, so the kind of model that relates to divine energy or divine presence in some sort. So those are the different models, and the one that I think quite firmly came down on the side of was this idea of the idealist model, which is what I've kind of summarized here. The idealist model really is a model, a magical model and a mystical model and a philosophical model that posits that whereas we generally tend to think of ourselves existing in a world of matter, and that consciousness has sprung up from matter, so life forms have evolved and those life forms eventually have formed consciousness, and then are able to perceive themselves. The idealist model actually comes at it from a different angle, which says that actually the underlying ground of being is consciousness, and that matter, or what appears to us to be matter, solid things like our bodies and chairs and windows and buildings and so on, actually are not solid in the way that we think they are. They're not even solid in the physical sense. I know that, you know, obviously science is telling us that these seemingly solid objects actually have got lots of empty space in them if you look at them really closely with a very powerful microscope. But this is actually positing that all of material creation, the material world, is something that is not something that the mind exists within, but the other way around. The material world exists within the mind, and by the mind I don't mean our individual minds, I mean the collective mind, the ground of being, the consciousness from which everything springs. That's the idealist model, and we'll go into that at some point in the future. I've got something to announce at the end of this video, so watch for that. So yes, that's the idealist model, and what I showed you was this kind of diagram which helped summarize this. And actually I've adapted this diagram from a diagram that was put together by Kenneth Wapnick, who is one of the foremost teachers of A Course in Miracles, and he was actually involved in putting together and publishing the version of A Course in Miracles that eventually became the most popular one around, and I'll come back to that in a second. This isn't exactly the same as his model, but it's adapted from it. So there's two types of reality in this model. There's actual reality, which is the one that we exist within, or we feel that we exist within. This is a dualistic world where there's ups and downs, left and rights and so on. It's a world of matter, it's a world of bodies, so we feel that we've got a body, we're a physical body, or we've got a mind inside our body and it's navigating its way through the world. This is where our ego exists, where our personality exists. It's the world of the small self, so a self with a small s. It's a world of two-ness. It's a world where opinions matter, where everyone can have different perspective on things. There is no absolute truth. It's a world of neediness. We need things in order to survive. We need to be able to consume things in order to survive. It's all changing, and it's bounded by space and by time. We age, we are limited by where we are physically in the world. Things have a beginning, a middle and an end, etc, etc. And it's a world of cause and effect. So I smack myself on the arm with a hammer, I break my arm. I invest money in shares that do really well, I make some money in return. It's a world of cause and effect. You know, the things that we sow are basically the things that we reap. Now, that's the actual reality world. And then the other world, the other model, if you like, or the other part of the model, is this absolute reality, which some wisdom traditions would call the ground of being. Some people would call it God. Some people would call it self with a capital S. Jung might call it that. This is a non-dualistic world where things are not separate. Everything is one. And you know, immediately, of course, we come into the problem of, if this is non-dualistic and there are no differences in separation, we can't even really talk in terms of things like self and God and so on, because the moment you imply something, a thing or a concept of any sort, you're automatically applying or implying its opposite. And that's because our brains work in this dualistic world. So even when we're trying to conceive of absolute reality, we cannot do it, which is why we need mythology. It's why we need poetry. It's why we need art. It's why we need wisdom traditions that are not based on rational explanation, because some of this can't be explained rationally. But just bear with me for the moment in terms of this model, because this model helps us, I think, to understand it a bit better. So it's the world of God, the world of self with a big S. It's a world of oneness. It's the one world of absolute truth. Some might call it the world of love. It's changeless, it's infinite, and it's eternal. Bearing in mind that infinite does not mean there's just endless space. It means that there is no space. There's no space and no boundedness. Just as eternal doesn't mean that there's endless time. It means there's no time. There's timelessness. So there's absolute reality and the actual reality. And there's another type of cause and effect, because in some of the Eastern wisdom traditions we talk about, or they talk about, the idea of mutual arising. So we think in this world that certain effects happen as a result of cause. From the perspective of absolute reality, both cause and effect in this world are both effects of ultimate cause, which comes from this absolute reality. In other words, if it moves, if God moves, if capital S self moves, if truth moves, if oneness moves, then if it moves, you move, I move. We are being done. We're not doing, we are being done. We're not the doer, we are those that are the effects of this doer. So it's very difficult to describe in words, but where I've got to in terms of my own magical studies and my understanding of magic is that the idealist model works for me, because I mentioned in a previous video that if I try to limit myself to the idea that magical practice is just about manipulating external events, and by external events and external entities I include our own personal self in this. So you know, if we're about trying to change ourselves or trying to change the world or our circumstances, there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with that at all. It's just that we know from experience that sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. So my model of magic, the one that I proposed around the idealist model, was that magic can be as much about changing our perspective on things as it is about changing the things that we are perceiving. So that is influenced definitely by my studies of mysticism, and in fact there's an interesting quote from A Course in Miracles. Now I consider A Course in Miracles, and I'm going to be talking a bit more about A Course in Miracles on this channel in the future, but I consider A Course in Miracles to be one of the great wisdom traditions or wisdom texts, certainly of the modern world. I think it's up there in terms of expounding on a non-dualistic metaphysical framework, if you like. It's up there with the Tao Te Ching and the Bhagavad Gita and the Gnostic Gospels and so on. It's quite difficult to get into and to study, particularly if you are thrown by the fact that it comes with a very Christianized language, and in fact it's written the author of this. It was a channeled text. It was channeled through a lady called Helen Schuckman in the 60s. But the author, according to the text and according to the channel, is Jesus. And I know that a lot of people hear that and go, what on earth? But what I would say about that is that the Course in Miracles is really all about figuring out or helping us as limited, separated individual human beings to figure out that we are not the separated individual human beings that we think we are, that actually we are part of the whole oneness, God, and a misperception keeps us separated, and it keeps us in a world that is eternally dualistic and therefore is ultimately eternally problematic, because the things that we attach to in this world and that we care about in this world are always going to pass away. And if we are only established and attached to those things, to the people we love, to the jobs we love, to our bodies, to our health, etc., we're backing the wrong horse, because we're always going to lose. And the Course in Miracles, like all non-dualistic philosophies, is saying actually there is something, there's a higher truth, there's a higher view, and that is being established in the unchanging. But you can't just do that. You can't just say, oh, I am one with everything. Try saying that and then your leg gets chopped off. How happy are you going to be then? Generally what we find in this world is that we are attached to things and we are limited by these attachments. And mystical study and some forms of magical study are about helping us to see things at that higher level, so that we become more established in the truth of who we are, as the mind that sees everything rather than the body that is experiencing everything. It's difficult to summarize in only a few words, so I'm conscious that might not make much sense. But Course in Miracles also speaks about magic, but it has a very specific definition of magic. It does not mean magic in the sense that we might mean, which is that kind of using, if you like, supernatural or supernormal forces and perspectives to help us move around in this world and achieve things in this world. The Course in Miracles specifically uses the word magic to define a misperception of the mind. So anything that would keep us in a form of separation and that tries to manipulate things at this level is what it would call magic. So that includes things like taking an aspirin if you've got a headache. It's not saying don't take an aspirin if you've got a headache. What it's saying is that from this perspective, the headache, the aspirin, the fact that you believe you're a person, the fact that you believe that you have got a headache, etc., is all a symptom of the separation that has happened in the mind of this one entity, which in the Christian language of the Course talks about the Son of God and Christ and so on. It doesn't mean those terms in the way that some other things are meant, because in Christian language, in the Bible and so on, it means it in a very different kind of way. So the definition that is given here is magic. This is from the text of the Course in Miracles, and it's from chapter 2, section 5, and which is the section is called The Function of the Miracle Worker, and it's from paragraph 2, the very first sentence in paragraph 2. Magic is the mindless or the miscreative use of mind. Now, that does not mean don't do magic. That does not mean if you're a chaos magician or somebody who follows a kind of energy model of magic that you are wrong and you shouldn't do it. It just means that from the Course's perspective and from a non-dualistic perspective, either you are operating in this world or you're operating or trying to operate from this world. And the miracle in the Course in Miracles is being clear about the choice you're making. Are you choosing oneness or are you choosing separation? Are you choosing connection and love, or are you choosing dissolution and separation and conflict, ultimately, in this world? The Course in Miracles acknowledges that we are in this world, so it's not saying to pretend you're in this world, but it's saying in this world you can make a choice. Either you can make a right-minded choice or a wrong-minded choice. Now, another commentary on mysticism and magic came from Evelyn Underhill, who was a mystic and who also wrote the book called Mysticism. And she wrote about magic, and again is using it in a kind of more general sense, not so much in the sense of the technical form of magic that we might talk about, but the idea of using magic as a way of manipulating things. And she writes, magic wants to get, mysticism wants to give. And the other thing, this by the way is from this book called Mysticism and Miracles, A Course in Mysticism and Miracles by John Mundy, PhD, who is another teacher of A Course in Miracles. And he talks about mysticism. He did some work to look at what different definitions of mysticism are, and he came up with a list of things that mysticism is. Mysticism is a direct experience of God and an awareness of truth. And here we can use God in the sense of the God of your understanding. Mysticism is knowledge that comes from the self, the big capital S self, and not the ego self. Mysticism is realizing there is no such thing as ego. Because in the illusory world, which is the world that is not the absolute reality from which everything flows, we think that there's an ego, we think there's a personality, but at this level, this is all illusory. This flows from that. That's the real world. Mysticism is knowledge of the interconnectedness of all things, oneness, non-dual. Mysticism is the science and art of the spiritual life. Now that sounds a bit like some of the definitions that you see in magic. The science and art of changing the world in conformity with will, etc. Mysticism is the science of self-evident reality. Mysticism is an experience that brings awareness of higher truth. Mysticism is a transcending of the ego world to experience self with a capital S. Mysticism is direct union with the divine by means of contemplation. Mysticism is a belief in the power of spiritual access to ultimate reality. Mysticism is about clearing the mind to access transcendence, to move away from misperceptions and separation and to access transcendence. Mysticism is a realization that truth is immanent and transcendent. In other words, it's here all the time, it's available to us. Mysticism is being receptive instead of projective. Mysticism is the awakening within the self of divine reality. And mysticism is a purification of perception and seeing through illusions. Mysticism is an inner return to our divine source in consciousness. And mysticism is faith in a transformative higher power over dogma. And the reason I mention all of that is that all of that conforms very neatly to the idealist model of magic. Not that it doesn't conform to the other models, because you can, of course, take a completely right-minded view and a view that observes the oneness of everything and respects the oneness of everything and sees everything as being part and parcel of one thing in any of these models. But here's my conclusion in terms of how I want to use magic. If I'm doing a magical practice and I'm doing it to just acquire something, like more money or more things or a particular holiday or a lover or something, or if I'm doing magic to wreak revenge on someone or to take a bit of an energetic pot shot at somebody, it's very clear that I am working from a dualistic framework, from a framework where there is two-ness, there is separation, there's opinion, and my opinion is better than your opinion, so I'm going to get you. And I want to create an effect based on the cause of my magic. So that's if I wanted to do that. I don't want to do that. I'm not to say that I don't want money when I need money and, nice holidays and all that kind of stuff. But I want my magic to be about union, about connectedness, about being more loving, about feeling more part and parcel of everything and feeling less separated from everything, and acknowledging that I am part of something bigger than my ego can conceive of. For me, that is what magic can be used for and is the kind of magic that I would want to use. And the interesting thing about A Course in Miracles is that it also talks about the difference between form and content. So one of the things it says many times in the Course is that the form doesn't matter. So it does not matter whether you're doing that magic, that magic, that magic, that magic, that magic, that magic, or any magic or no magic. If the content is about connectedness and about love and about seeing how things fit together, then you are taking an enlightened mystical approach, if you like. one of the most powerful tools that the course describes in terms of establishing oneself in this reality and developing a better life, if you like, and a more loving, caring, compassionate life in this reality is through the practice of forgiveness. And forgiveness is something that is not just a simple thing of saying, you know, I'll let you off the hook for what you did, or what I think you did. The course goes into more detail in that, and we'll get to that at some point in the future. So really that's my kind of summary of where I'm at with magical practice. For me, it's about connectedness, it's about feeling part of a bigger whole, it's about recognising as well that the other people that I interact with are part of that whole as well, which of course can be challenging at times. If somebody does something or says something that upsets us, then it's very easy to feel separated and to perpetuate that separation with attack and defensiveness and so on. And a magical, mystical approach from my perspective can be about helping to heal those divisions. And that's the kind of magic that I explore and want to explore. And that kind of leads me to my announcement, which is the announcement of another series. And I'll say a bit more about the other series, or the new series, in a separate video, because I think it deserves a bit of explication. But basically, I am going to initiate a series where I am going to take myself through a process of self-inquiry to help me connect more and more with this absolute reality, if you like, this ground of being. And there are various practices, of course, that one can use to do that. Meditation, loving kindness practice, and various forms of self-inquiry. And that's really what I'm going to be focusing on. Self-inquiry into absolute reality, into awareness, awareness inquiry, finding what's really true if we actually sit and get still. I mean, really the question that I'm looking to answer, it's a question I look to answer in my magical practice, and certainly in this new series, is who am I? What am I? And when I say I mean this for all of us. You know, what are we? We think of ourselves as human beings rattling around this planet, but what are we really? Is that all we are, or are we something different to or more than that? And so the new series will be about exploring that question. So easy question to explore, eh? What am I? Who am I? Nice and lightweight stuff for the next series. So I hope you'll join me for that. And in that series, I will be dipping into, in more detail, A Course in Miracles, and I'll be dipping into other wisdom texts, the Bhagavad Gita, the Tao Te Ching, the I Ching, and of course, our beloved Tarot, which has so much to say about all of this. It really does. And I explored some of that in my Tarot to the Nine series, and this will be an opportunity to go into it in even more depth. So I hope you'll join me, and whatever model of magic you are practicing and wish to continue to practice, I wish you all the best. Remember, the best model of magic is the one that's right for you. Nobody else can tell you what that is. You've got to find it for yourself. It's like anything else, like tarot, like anything. So if you'd like to join me for my series, I'll see you over there. I might even see you in a few videos in between now and then, but certainly for awareness inquiries, I think I'm going to call it, I'll see you very soon. Take care of yourselves. Bye.